All right, good morning. We are back. This is Exodus Lesson 1A. So we are going to be looking at the first 3 days of our homework for Lesson 1 in the book of study of Exodus. How was it? Did you guys find that it was helpful to only have to get through 2 chapters of homework? Yeah, me too. I actually really enjoyed it because I felt like I was going slow enough. I mean, still at the end, I had to push myself, figured out how we needed to discuss in group time. But the homework itself, I had plenty of time to do tons of word studies and cross-referencing on my own things that I had personal interest in. So I hope that was true for all of you and that you're taking advantage of the fact that I've slowed it down for you. That you use the time to actually go deeper rather than just say, oh, good, the word. I don't want you to do that. I want you to spend the same amount of time, but I want you to enjoy it. So that was the reason for breaking things down. I want to start with a very short reading here. It's in the book of Psalms. It's Psalm 33, and it's just a portion of it. I'm going to start in verse 6, and I want you to consider what's being said here in this passage in light of what we looked at this week in our Exodus study, okay? Here he begins in verse 6, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth all their host. He gathers the waters of the sea together as a heap, and he lays up the deep in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. The Lord nullifies the counsel of the nations. He frustrates the plans of the peoples. The counsel of the Lord stands forever. The plans of his heart from generation to generation. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people whom he has chosen for his own inheritance. Isn't that awesome? That was such a beautiful little passage there. And, sometimes I don't know how I want to get us kind of back into thinking about what we did in our homework. But when I flipped through just a few minutes ago here and said, well, what Lord do you have to say on this subject that we're in? And this one just fell right open. So that was from the Lord. That was his word to you this morning. And I pray that really does have a good application in your thinking to what we've been looking at. Now, last week, for a lot of you weren't here for the review that I took everyone through. Did you get a chance to go online and watch? Okay, great. Because it was for me, that was so, did you find it helpful when you got into the homework this week and went, oh, okay, I can see where we're going? It's interesting because we often take the Word of God and we isolate either, in the case of Exodus, a whole book from its connected parts, or we isolate a chapter from what came before and what's coming after. That one we do all the time because every time you start a new observation worksheet, you begin with the beginning of a new chapter, right? And it's like, in our heads, I do not know why we do this, but we just forget what was in the first chapters before it, and we're into where we're at now, and we disconnect. So it's so healthy that Precept is teaching us to keep a cohesive flow of thought and connect events previous to what's following and what God's plan is in all of this. Nothing can thwart his plans. Are we seeing that in Exodus already in chapters 1 and 2? That the Pharaoh who would have had his way in things, he would have tried to destroy the plan of God. But we know we closed out, was it in chapter 1 at the end where it says, at the end of chapter 2 where he says he remembered his covenant and he heard their cries. God has a plan, and no one, not even the king of a nation, can thwart what God has got in store. So the other thing that for me personally, that I enjoyed about what God showed me as I prepared to do that review for you all last week was looking at the timeline. Now that was a simple timeline, just lay it out. Creation, the fall, in the introduction of the serpent, and the promised seed came in. All that came in those first couple of 2-3 chapters. Then we moved to Noah and the flood. What we saw was when man disobeyed God in the garden, it set man on a spiral down that became progressively worse and worse. Does anybody have an idea as to why it went so badly so quickly?
Because we're human.
Well, okay, first of all, we are human, but what was the restraining thing that we have now that we didn't? I'm not talking about now in the new covenant, but what was the restraining thing that God seemed to have in store after the flood that he didn't have before the flood? In particular, since the days of Moses, where we're at now. What has God put in place as a covenant? There's a covenant. And what was given to us in that covenant? What was that covenant called with Moses? What would you call the Mosaic covenant? The law. Okay. Are you starting to follow my thinking? The law. Think of all that happened before in the books, Genesis, the storyline of Genesis up to the point of Exodus, where we are now. Second book in the Bible. So we're not that far, but we're quite a ways in history, but we're not that far in the unfolding message that God is giving us. So apparently, he's skipping a whole lot of time and jumping right to a next point. The first point then in Genesis on the whole is, what was the message that we see about humanity? What is man by definition?
Simple.
Attribute. Huh? Yeah. Sinful. There you go. So disobedient and sinful. So what I saw then when I went back to collectively do a good contextual setting, what I came to see was that Genesis is not isolated from the books that follow, right? So what we saw is the first 5 books of the law are referred to by the Pentateuch. And do you remember what I said last week about the Pentateuch, how the Jews view those first 5 books?
As if it's just one.
As if it's one. It's a cohesive message. And in that cohesive message, then, what you can do is you can take Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and you can handle them as you would in a book study, for instance, in the New Testament, and you can look at those 5 books as segment divisions. They each have a message, right? And what is the unfolding message of those 5 books? What is God laying out for us in the book of the law? Who God is, who man is, and what is our relationship with God? Who is man in relationship to God? And so God is unfolding, though, what is his plan? It's a plan for what? Salvation, for redemption, for restored relationship. The very first thing we learn about man back in Genesis is man is a sinner. And as we moving through these 5 books, then what we're going to see is God in response to that, it was known before the foundation of the world. Good morning. We're happy to see you. God knew from before the foundation of the earth that man would be a sinner, that there would be rebellion, because God created us in his image, and one of the things he gave to us was free will, which blows my mind, because that means God is a God of free will, and he chooses to love us in spite of ourselves, right? So in this unfolding message of these 5 paragraphs, which are called books, the first 5 books of the law, this unfolding message, and as I looked at it in my own personal observation, is this. We see man is a sinner in Genesis. In Exodus, what are we going to see God do for us? Redemption. He's going to redeem us. In Leviticus, what are we taught about who God is? He is holy God. And man must treat God as holy, right? In Numbers, what do we see in Numbers happens?
Consequences.
Lots of consequences, because man rebels, and God says, okay, if you're going to rebel, this is how I'm going to respond. And as a matter of fact, when I talked about it, I kind of broke it down into 2 possibilities of people types, right? There was Moses, and then there was the general population of Israel in the book of Numbers. With the general population, God's response to them was, you will what? What will happen to them? What will not happen for them? They will not enter the promised land. And with Moses, however, we had the same thing. He disobeyed God, and he was told he couldn't enter in either. What's the distinction between the general population and Moses as far as what we know for sure?
He was of the priesthood, is that what you're talking? Well, not the priesthood, he was of the Levites, but yeah.
Yeah,
Aaron
but
was a priest.
right, but Moses therefore was a righteous man, and we see him later this week in the book of Hebrews in the Hall of Faith. So the general, and we're not saying all the people. We're just saying, as a general picture, what God shows us in the book of Numbers. Then is there is a response of God to people who refuse to follow Him and refuse to repent and refuse to bow their knee to God, and His response is, "You shall not enter." In Hebrews earlier, which we didn't look at this week, but that I took you to, we see in Hebrews 3 and 4, God said this was judgment because they were disobedient and without faith. And therefore, they don't enter into the rest of God, Hebrews chapter 4. So it's a picture of how does God deal with unsaved man? But it's also a picture of what about the saved man who is also still rebellious? Consequences. So either it's a rejection and you will never enter into the promised land, which is a picture of eternity with God, or God will cause consequences to fall upon you. You will either lose reward or lose some kind of blessing or benefit. So it's very interesting that Numbers does that for us. It shows us God responding to the saved man and the unsaved man concerning their rebellion in different, distinct ways, and yet there's discipline or there's judgment, one or the other. So he's a judge there. Then in Deuteronomy, what do we see then happen? Remember my laws. Remember what I want from you. Remember my promises. Remember that I've given you a good law and it's for your good to do it. Therefore, man must live then, according to Deuteronomy, to do the will of God. There has to be a submission to submit your life to the will of God. What a beautiful plan of redemption that is. Then I thought in my little head, this is just like Romans. Because Romans 1 through 3, man is a sinner. Romans 4 and 5, he needs salvation. He needs that redemption that we're looking at here in Exodus. Romans 6 to 8, sanctification. Your God is holy, so you be holy. What a nice parallel that is to Leviticus. Chapters 9 to 11, God is the sovereign Lord and the judge. He has sovereignty over your salvation. Who are you, old man, to argue with God about how he handles things or how he does things? We're looking right now in Exodus and we're like, why, God, did Israel have to spend 400 years in bondage? Why? Well, now we're going to start to see why, and that there is a plan in this, and it's a good plan, and it actually was for their preservation as a people, so that when they went back on that land, they would be a strong enough nation to go in and conquer and take a hold. So amazing, this parallel. And then the last 4 chapters in Romans cover service, doing the will of God. It's exactly what's said in Deuteronomy. Remember the law of God and the will of God and do it. Romans, same thing. Do God's will. Be subject to authorities. Walk according to love. Accept one another in love. With one voice glorify God. Beware of deceivers. So there's instruction in there on how to live and do the will of God in Romans. Blew me away. I went, oh my gosh. One is for the Old Testament covenant. It comes under a slightly different perspective. Why? Well, the Old Covenant is talking about what? Something future, right? A seed. It's still based on belief that God has said and God will do. That's what we just read in this Psalm passage, Psalm 33, that God speaks and no one can thwart God's plan. God has a plan. Man is being cared for and loved unconditionally through grace in the process of God, and he draws all men. He desires that none perish, no, not one, and yet man has free will. And so we're seeing, as we go into the book of Exodus, this picture of relationship with who God is and who man is, and who man must be if they want relationship with God. If you want relationship with God, these are principles that you must bow your knee to. I love that. Okay, so that is, pardon?
Can we get a copy of that?
Well,
Because I I didn't know about describing the first 5 books. I didn't.
Yeah, you didn't see the video. Okay, go online and watch the video. But okay, I will send it out. But here's the thing: you do have to do your own homework, and okay, and I don't mind. Remind me. Hold on to that and remind me to send that to you. Okay, because I'm always a little hesitant to give things out that we haven't studied yet. Like we haven't gone into Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy yet. And there's a lot of information there that kind of lays it all out. So you're already, it's like a presupposition. I hate putting presuppositions into people's head. But it is the big picture. It's the context setting. So I have said it.
Well, you said it here on the video, and you said it on
I've
last week's
said it.
video.
I've said it before, so it's not like it's a total mystery. Is that you remind me to do that? Okay, I'll send that one out to you. Listen, I never had this revelation for myself before. I did go on to Kay's videos this week and watch the first 2 lessons of what she presents, and she actually goes into something like, about the Deuteronomy. She doesn't do Romans at all, but she did the Deuteronomy unfolding, but not exactly. I mean, it was close. I was like, she was almost where I went. And so it gave me confirmation that I was seeing it correctly, and I already had my confirmation because God gave me Romans as the parallel in the New Testament. So it's once you're shown, it's obvious. But until somebody points it out, sometimes we miss it. And that's just the mystery of how God, works in everybody's little pea brains differently. But it's really exciting when it happens. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and send that out to you.
30 minutes in.
30 minutes in. Don't talk to me about time. Okay. There is a lot that we can go through here in this. So what we're going to do is handle it just like we always do. In your how-to study book, you are in looking at the details, how to observe the text in its details. So you don't really do an overview when you're handling a historical book. You handle it chapter by chapter. We talked about that last week. So that's what we're going to be doing. That means there's going to be a lot of repetitive pattern to how we handle every class, so you're not going to be caught off guard. It means every week we are going to try to discern what the major theme is, what the major subject is of each chapter. And from that discerning of what the major subject is, we're going to title our chapter, and then we are going to outline each paragraph so that we see the flow of thought. And then along the way of discussing that, we're going to say, what are some specific things that popped out to you that may have either accentuated or highlighted some insight that really added depth of meaning and interest, and also just a profoundness of God speaking to you in your heart. I want you to do that for yourself, because we each have a different brain. We each have a different kind of connection in our faith walk with God. You have to be the one that taps in. And little by little, God's going to grow you in this. It's also going to teach you the disciplines of, don't be afraid of venturing out and doing a little bit beyond what Kay asks you to do in the homework. We've slowed it down so that you have time to do that. I want you to observe, like, for instance, one of the things I did was a couple of word studies. One of them that I thought was profound, and I put it on my chart to cover it today, were some people's names and what they meant and how it related to the storyline. One point that we always try to remember to do is our focus should always be about who is God, right? Because that is, after all, what the whole Pentateuch's about, who is God and who is man. So anytime you see a name of God given to you, you should do a word study on it. So far, the only name of God we've had is what? Doesn't come until verse 17 of chapter 1. God. It's not really like, oh, yay. Okay, it's just God. Well, but if you have done a word study on that, you're going to see how it relates to exactly what we're looking at here. And I think that's a real good discipline as inductive students to get used to doing, is even though, sometimes we get so familiar with certain things that we just zip past it. but I want you to try to make yourself slow down and say, okay, if a name of God is given to me and it's different from what we've seen here in Exodus 1 from here forward, anytime a new name for God is given, make sure, if there is one, then make sure that you note it and you go do a word study on it. So we'll talk about that name of God in just a few minutes here. Okay, so let's start with our Exodus work. Tell me, when you did your homework, the first thing you should have done was read through the text and look for your keywords, your geographical locations, any time references. She had you looking for those as well, correct? Okay, so let's talk in general about those, starting with those key words. What kind of keywords did you see in Exodus 1?
Well, Egypt.
Egypt. So one of your first, there's actually a couple of different geographicals. The first one is Egypt. Obviously, that's major because that gives us the location of the events that are transpiring. Okay?
The cities.
A couple of cities,
Right.
Pithom and Ramses, right? I wasn't sure why those were mentioned. Did anybody have time to research why those would be significantly mentioned? Anybody get to work on that? Come on, y'all. You have to help me. This is a mutual share and tell. I mean, I did a lot of other things, but I actually didn't go very deep. It entered my mind, however. I thought, why are those two cities mentioned?
I thought maybe it was just to prove that it's a real document, it's not a story, it's
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
These were the real cities.
Yeah. Could be. And I thought on those lines as well. And I also thought about the fact that one of the things that we're all kind of arguing over in biblical history is the timing of these events, right? We're not sure which Pharaoh is being spoken of in the context here. And sometimes historical excavations can date a particular thing. So if they go to a city, if they find the location of one of these cities and dig through the layers of dirt, they can sometimes figure out which dynasty or which era in history it falls in. So maybe it had to do with something for our benefit eventually to identify, like you said, a geographical location, and it's a real place, you know. I've been to some of these real places. I've lived in some of these real places, having lived in Turkey, and that's significant to me as a believer. It has a real impact. So, okay, so that's a couple of things. So just think on those things.
Wasn't the name Ramses associated with that pharaoh at that particular time? Because that name jumped out to me when I read it.
Well, we know Ramses from the old movie of Moses, right? But I think, you know, it's just like anything else. We have some names that are common names in certain cultures. John, you know, in our world, Michael, you know, so in history, there's sometimes familiar names. Ramses was something real familiar, apparently, in that geographical area of the world. I don't know. So again, that question could have been ran down as a rabbit trail. So that's my point in bringing this out. For you, if you hit something like that and you're like, why do I need to know about Pithom and Ramses? What's significant about that? Do a word study on them. Go to a map. Look them up. I did do a map. I did go and look to see where on the map. And here we have Ramses up here. So here's this grayish area. It says Lower Egypt, so there's more of it than that. But this area, and Ramses is up here, and Pithomo is how they pronounce it here. Pithom. Slightly different spelling, but the same place. So I located it on a map just out of curiosity, and then that was all I really had time to do because I was moving on. But if any of you came up with any really good insights on that or know anything, maybe you've had other studies, send them in by email to me. I would love to read up on that. Okay, so those are our geographical places that are mentioned. Any others?
The words afflict, afflicted,
Afflict and afflicted, okay.
labor, all that. I put hard labor.
Hard labor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then mighty, vigorous.
Yes. Labor, rigorous labor, hard labor. Okay. And when you did any work on that, was there anything insightful that you saw on those subject matters? What did it show to you about the the historical setting of that time for Israel?
They multiplied.
They multiplied in spite of all the vigorous, rigorous,
And doesn't that
laborious.
happen all the time, even today? The Christians that are being held down, and then it just goes.
It does seem like it, yeah.
Here.
I wonder if that's partly our rebellious nature. Tell me I can't, and I'm going to. Yeah? Yeah.
Could be.
I don't know, but that's very. But it is very, I think, enlightening in context to the storyline of this people who went down there and having been put under the thumb of harsh labor, and yet they multiplied. And our thinking would be that they wouldn't, right? And yet they did. So that's really cool. Okay. All right. Any other?
I'd say dread and fear.
Oh, yes. Dread and fear.
Yeah.
And what was the dread and fear about?
Well, the Pharaoh, the king, dreaded the Israelites because he thought they'd become more powerful and take over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the fear was the midwives. They feared God.
Yeah.
And they feared God, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I even think that Pharaoh feared Israel too. I mean,
But
there's
it
two
didn't
different
say
kinds.
that.
No, it didn't.
Yeah.
But yes, that's very good. Yeah, the Pharaoh, it says in verse 10 that he was worried that they would continue to multiply in the event of war, that then they will join themselves with those that hate him. And I'm like, you know what? If you treated those people better, they wouldn't. They would have fought with you to protect their country, right? So where in that storyline do you see God at his hand at work in any of this? Why might God not want them to become?
Because he's going to move them out.
Yes.
Right.
Once the Egyptians
Yeah.
stay there,
Yeah.
he's just taking his people.
So in a way, having come out of Peter, where we talked about hardship and persecution and trials and tribulations and how they affect us as we're in this faith walk with God, it seems like what God says is, first of all, those kinds of trials and tribulations, they prove your faith is either true or not true, right? But they also refine you and purify you and help you stand firmer and stronger. Well, here we see another kind of picture of what a trials and tribulation can do. And it's very similar to what happened in the book of Acts with the church when it first started, right? There was a passage I remember that talked about the people, they were all gathering together in harmony and fellowship and loving one another and sharing meals and praying and just enjoying the relationship with one another. And then what did God do? He brought persecution by the Romans. And then what did that cause them to do? Scatter. Because what was God's intention for his word? That it spread out, right? And yet they were doing what? They were camping out in this great... the church does this, right? We were just talking about it before we started class, about how we love to have this cohesive, loving environment that Bible study groups can bring to us as Christians. It puts us in a place where we have commonality. We don't have bitterness or aggressiveness against one another. We're not being persecuted by one another in this classroom. We're being loved and nurtured. And that's what we desire to have. But God says, yes, but you need to be out there giving that same kind of love for me and love for your fellow man to the world that's dying and lost. Oh, that's so hard, Lord. I don't want to. So what does God do in Acts? He brings persecution so they will scatter. In this case, what do we see God doing? Bringing persecution for what reason? So that they'll leave. They'll want to leave. They'll have a desire to leave. Isn't that interesting? Okay. All right. What about the subject of death and alive, dead and alive in this? Who's going to be dead and who's going to be kept alive? Hmm? Yes, he did.
Well, you're talking about the children,
Yeah,
the
what-
babies, right, the boys, they're
Oh,
supposed to,
yeah.
they're supposed to put them to death. and the
Yeah.
girls-
Put the boys to death, but keep the girls alive. Now, one of the things Kay asked us to do on day 3 of our homework this week was to go back and meditate on all these things that we've seen so far. Interesting that she stopped it right there at the end of chapter 2 and said, now stop and meditate. I want you to consider what you're seeing in here about God. Well, one of the things we're seeing is that God allows this heavy bondage and heavy basically persecution to come against them so that they won't be happy to stay there. They want to leave. And then secondarily, we also see another thing going on. I think what we see is a spiritual warfare being introduced here. Very much like what we saw back in the garden where Adam and Eve are tempted to disobey God. Here what we see, though, is, in response to that rebellion back in the garden in Genesis chapter 3, God's response was, I'm going to bring a seed to crush the head of Satan, right? The deceiver, the aggressor, the one who hates me and my people. So in this flow of thought here, starting in 15 down, where we see life and death between children, girls and boys, who dies? The boys. And who is God going to send? A boy seed, right? So did any of you ponder on that at all, about what you see here? Where did it make you go in your head?
Time of Jesus' birth.
Yeah? How about the time of Jesus' birth?
They're killing all the boys.
They're killing the boy babies. So, wow, it seems like here is the first time we're seeing an enemy of God's people. In this case, is personified through Pharaoh. But who is he therefore a picture of? If you go back to the garden, Satan. So he is a demonic force, or being used and influenced by a demonic force to come against God's people on the whole, and specifically, interesting, the boy babies. Why the boy babies? Well, what's going to happen to the girls if all the boy babies are killed and they stay in Egypt? They become Egyptian because they marry an Egyptian. And what happened in the flood when the sons of God married the daughters of men? They drew their hearts away from God. They spiraled down deeper, very quickly, until God had to bring a flood and destroy the whole earth, with the exception of Noah and his family. So it sounds like to me there's a demonic plan going on here. It made me think of Revelation. What do we see in Revelation 12? Where we saw the dragon appear and presented, right? And what did the dragon?
He wants to devour the woman and the child.
That's right. He stood before the woman as she was about to give birth. Whoa, wait a minute. That sounds just like what's going on here. As the women are giving birth, he stood before the woman to devour her child. So if Satan can devour the boy babies and somehow thwart the plan of God, what we saw in Psalm 33 can't be done, but Satan thinks he can. He's trying to thwart the plan of God. Oh, what amazing! Just meditating for 5 seconds, rather than skipping through your homework and filling in the blanks. Ponder the bigger picture. What is the spiritual message that's going on here? What is God doing? What did he force into a position? Why does he have to force man to want to leave, when they already knew God had told Abraham, I'm going to bring you out in 400 years? Why is Moses responding the way he did in chapter 2? What made, or what propelled Moses to think to come in and do the things that he does in that unfolding storyline? Beautiful insights when you stop to think and you ponder on this. Okay. Whew. Already we got so much out of this. So let's go and start. Did I cover everything? What else did I miss? Okay. Put to death the sons. And so there was a contrast between death and being kept alive. We see that there's a demonic plan of thwarting God in this, I think, that it becomes pretty evident really quickly. We see that this is the first introduction of that plan, which is going to come again at the time of the birth of Christ. And we see it referred to in Revelation. That ties a thread right through. Do you see? So if you get the full picture in your head and you analyze what you're looking at, pretty soon you do see the thread. And it doesn't just stop with the Pentateuch. It goes all the way to Revelation at the very end of the age. Awesome. Okay. So now let's do the paragraphs and let's talk through anything that you guys are interested in talking about. So let's start with the title for this chapter. Tell me what on the whole, or who on the whole, is Exodus 1 about?
Sons of Israel.
It's all about the sons of Israel, right? And what happened to the sons of Israel in this chapter? That's quite amazing. They increased in numbers. So it begins in verses 1 through 7 telling us how they came in. So it's about the sons of Israel. So on the whole, what do we see? They are in Egypt, in Egyptian bondage, right? And what happened? Yeah. Israel grew. I'll put it this way, into a mighty nation. How about that? Okay, so there's how I titled mine. Anything close to that? Everybody good?
I added, and are oppressed.
And are oppressed, yeah. Even though oppressed, right. Okay, so we're going to look at that as we look at the paragraphs, okay? So let's do the paragraphs. So the first one is 1 through 7. What do you see happening? I need my black marker. This will be better here. 1 through 7 is the first paragraph. So if you had to look at this on the whole, what is going on in this 1 through 7?
It's basically scene setting, like catching us up that this is how we got here. We had these 70 people, you know, Jacob and his line and his kid, and they came in, and now they're all dead, and it's been time, and nobody can remember Joseph.
Isn't that
did
weird?
this amazing thing.
So
and
they
Egypt,
really
like,
jumped through history, didn't they? First of all, we leave Genesis, the end of Genesis, with Joseph down there, and he's gone down into Egypt. We know that storyline, how he was sold by his brothers down into Egypt, into slavery. And Joseph, by God's good mercy and plan, rose him up to become a leader so that he could do what? Save them. He said about what his brothers did to them, what? You meant it for evil, or men meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So we close Genesis with Joseph's attitude toward what happened to him. How many of you and I can say that about the trials and tribulations that we're going through? It seems like it was evil. It was something that felt like it was meant for evil against us. It felt like a personal assault. Whatever your trial or tribulation is, it's like, I don't like this, Lord, and it's not right and it's not fair. And yet, what does the scripture teach us about whatever is going on in our lives as human beings on this earth? God what? He means it for good. There is a good plan in it. You may not see it yet. You may not feel it yet. But there's a good plan. And here's what it boils down to. We must trust that that's true of our God. Do you know who your God is? That he's a God of if you go back to the Genesis record, in the garden, he has made everything perfect, beautiful, without sin. What is the first thing man does?
break the one law.
He breaks the one law that God gave to him, and he listened to the deceiver. And from there forward now, the world that we are living in right now, which is evil, which is fallen, which has sickness and disease and death, is our fault. And if we can't start there, then it's really impossible to come into relationship with God. You have to confess that it's really our fault. And that we can't blame the Creator who created it perfect for what we did to it, right? So if you can start with a confession that man is the sinner and we're the one responsible for this, then we can begin to move forward. So in Genesis, it ends with Joseph having that acknowledgement, man meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, and that that Joseph or Jacob and all of his sons then, because of a famine again, are having to seek refuge. We saw historically that this has happened before. Abraham did the same thing. And there was another time when Isaac was going to go down to Egypt, and God said, don't go. Stay here. I have another plan for you. So this is a consistent problem for these people of having to flee. Sometimes God says, yes, flee, and other times God says, no, stay. So now we have Jacob, and God says, go. He literally said, go, and I will be with you. I will be with you when you go into this captivity, and I will bring you back, and I will return you. So Kay had us go through several Genesis verses to give us that backdrop, right? Which it was actually at the close of chapter 2, though, where the covenant is made mention of. So 1 and 2 together as a breaking place was actually really good, because it stopped at the idea of there is a covenant that these people have with God. God made covenant with them. He's the one that cut the covenant. He is the one that walked between the pieces. All man had to do is say yes. And in that, then those promises are yes and amen. They are always, they cannot be undone. God's word will never be broken. He is going to do this for man. So when he makes a list here in the opening of Genesis, you're talking hundreds of years have passed, right? We're approaching, not quite yet, because we got about 40 years yet ahead from the point of, at the opening here of Exodus, until when Moses will come back out of that time in Midian and bring the people out. But we're close to that 400-year point. Okay, we're not quite there, but we're almost there. And what is the first thing God does in the record in verses 1 through 7? He makes sure that you know every single one of those sons through whom God promised Abraham, through your seed, I will do these things. And did any of you do lineage observation? Did you go to look for lineage charts to show you where things lay out together? Who is related to whom, and in which bloodline are different people groups? Did any of you do that? I think you'd find it very interesting to do that. Let me see here. I've got mine. One of the things I did was, the first thing I did was I went to look at the sons of Jacob, because that's what those first 7 verses do. And this shows you who in the family line, through the 4 wives, actually 2 wives and 2 handmaidens, through which Abraham conceived and gave birth to those 12 children. Well, we have Rachel over here, who is the younger one that he loved so much, who gave birth to Joseph, who is the one who was the one that God used in order to save Israel. Over here, though, is Leah. And from Leah's bloodline is Levi. One of her children is Levi. And who is Moses? Of the tribe of Levi. Very interesting. Very good perspective to have on that. You might want to go and look for little charts like this online for yourself. Okay? So you and I went back to Genesis. We see in Genesis 12 and 15, the background to this opening section is shown to us in those review verses that you looked at. God is already fulfilling many of those promises. He says, I'm going to deliver you. We're beginning to see that. He said to Abraham, I'm going to multiply you and make you a great nation. He told him, look at the stars. And that's how many people I'm going to bring from your posterities. And already we're seeing that. What is not mentioned in the opening of Exodus is specifically about the seed, but it is information that you might want to make a little note on your observation worksheet. Don't forget the seed. The promise is a seed through this bloodline. Okay? And that's, I think, significant. The sons of Jacob are listed as a record of the seed bloodline of covenant promised to Abraham. I believe that's why that specifically is listed there. Not one of them are lost. He's letting you know that he is watching over the entirety of these 12. There must be significant reason, and we do know there is, because when you get to Revelation, they're back on the scene again. And they're going to be put back on the land at the end of the age. Why? Because God made a covenant. Okay, so that's really important. So what do you want to title 1 through 7? How many came in, does it say, in that? 70. So we say, if the title is that Israel grew into a mighty nation, we want to see, how does chapter 1 support that statement? Well, the first thing we see is Israel came in as 70 people, right?
At least, yeah.
Well, and there was a few more, but the text says 70, right? And then they began to multiply from there. They came in as 70, then multiplied. Okay, and then let's go to 8 to 14. So that's all we really need to do is say, if this is the major subject of chapter 1, that Israel grew into a mighty nation while they were in this Egyptian bondage, how is God recording this for us? Well, he's showing you how little they were when they came in. So he starts with that. First, they came in little. But it ends, the very last verse, they were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. Okay, then 8 to 14, what's the next thought of this record?
Well, they multiplied despite the fact that they were slaves.
Yeah.
Hatched his plan to stop them from.
Yeah, so there was and I think it's interesting about the Pharaoh, it seems like he identifies the fact that he's a new Pharaoh. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, just said that you had one that didn't know him.
Yeah, now a king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So we know time has passed. You could have actually put a clock on that. I didn't do it myself, but you could put a time clock on that just to show the time has passed since Joseph and these 12 sons came in as only 70. Now some time has passed, and now there's a king that's risen up who does not know Joseph. And so in that new king came out. He was not so favorable. Where with Joseph's life, what did that Pharaoh do for Joseph? He exalted him, put him second in command over all of Egypt because of what Joseph did by God's providing Joseph as an architect for salvation for that nation also. And this particular Pharaoh, what did he do to the people here in these verses, 8 to 14?
Worked them to death.
Literally was trying to work them to death. And does it say why? Okay, so we have a new Pharaoh. I'm not going to put all that on here, but I will probably spell that wrong on occasion. Pharaoh, he's acting because of why? What's motivating him? He's in dread of them. Pharaoh, in dread of Israel. Oh, actually, Israel's numbers. Let's just do it that way. Israel's numbers, right? What does he do?
Compels them to labor vigorously.
Okay, hard labor. Okay. Pharaoh, in dread of Israel's numbers, imposed hard labor on them. So they had already begun to multiply. Now Pharaoh is concerned about them. I liked it. Did anybody do any word studies in that segment there?
I looked up wisely.
I did too. Thank you. Good. Give me that.
Shrewdly.
Shrewdly. And what does shrewd mean in this context? It's more negative than positive. As a matter of fact, yes. In verse 11 it says so. So you can see that he dealt wisely with them. So what did he do in the wise treatment? He appointed taskmasters to afflict hard labor on them. So where it says wisely, it was what kind of wisdom? God, man's with earthly wisdom and evil wisdom in that way. And then it goes on there all the way to verse 14. He even says, so that there was dread. But then in 14 it says, the labor in the field, all their labors which they rigorously imposed upon them. So this wise treatment was not wisdom that you would say like wisdom from God, but the kind of wisdom that man has in the world. In Acts 7:19, and I'm not going to take you back to the whole thing, but in Acts 17:19, he explains that in that text, which is, by the way, why did we go to Acts and Hebrews in lesson day 3?
Talk about Moses.
Yeah. So what does that tell you about the New Testament writings? How would you describe those when you move into Acts? And they start talking about things that happened back here. What are you actually getting from them? Yeah, New Testament commentary on what actually happened, because they're going to phrase it with a view of understanding better, which is how come we're able to grab new insights about what was actually going on in their minds and their thinking. So anytime a New Testament quotes the Old Testament, what you can call it, as far as I'm concerned, is New Testament commentary on Old Testament events. But it's divinely inspired commentary. So it's accurate, it's truthful, it's factual. It's not like somebody thought this. Unless they tell you that, unless the context of the flow of thought tells you that they were misreading something, if it's a direct quote and they're giving you additional details, like for instance, when we do the Abrahamic covenant, and it says, and he promised him that seed, right? He believed God, he reckoned it to him as righteousness. When we move forward, who do we see the seed is in Galatians? That seed is Christ, right? So we get New Testament commentary about who exactly that seed was. Awesome, right? Well, that's what we did when we went to Acts and Hebrews on day 3 of homework. We were getting New Testament commentary through Stephen and through the Hebrew writer about what happened that we're looking at right here in Exodus. Isn't God so good to us? Because we all have questions. There are still questions he's not answered to me. I mean, I would like to know all kinds of other things. But the things that he does give to us are the essentials. So in Acts 17, he explains there about this wise treatment of them. It says he mistreated them, and he feared them because they had grown to be a great number of people, and he worried that they would turn on him. That's why he did what he did. So his idea of dealt wisely with them in 1:14 says he imposed rigorously on them in all their labors. So it wasn't a wisdom that we would really like to have dealt with us. Okay, 15 to 19. Pardon?
Midwives.
There's a midwife that shows up. And what were the midwives told to do, and what did they do?
They were told to kill the boys,
Mhm.
and they killed no one. They lied.
Okay. When you're thinking at the flow of thought here, then Israel growing into a mighty nation, this statement here that Pharaoh ordered the babies be killed is a significant tit for tat or relationship. I mean, it has an answer basically to what we're seeing here. But Pharaoh ordered the babies be killed. And then there's a nice but, right? But what did the midwives do? And it tells their motivation. They fear God. The midwives feared God. Oh, boy, there's a lot we could go into there. Now, this is where I looked up the word God because it's the first mention of the name of God here. And God is number 430. Elohim, although I don't have it in front of me, but yes. And it's the plural for God, right? It's the triune God that's inferred. It's a title of the true God with a focus on the might and power of God, which I think is really interesting, especially when you think of the Exodus story on the whole totality of this book about the might and the power of God, how he's going to express that. All right, so that's a good one to do. You should have done God, 430, focus is on the might and power of God. Okay? It's the true God, the one true God. Okay? And that's going to be in contrast in time here to Egyptian gods, the false gods. It doesn't speak of that right here, but that's what's going to come up. So you might want to just make yourself a note on that. Okay. Now here is where we see the names of these women come up as we move to the next part. Let's see. Is it in here or here? I've forgotten where I found them at. 15 and 16, yeah, there it is up here. Okay, I didn't go up high enough on my page. Okay, so we have the name Shiphrah and Puah. Very interesting names, right? Puah, how would you like to be called that? Nothing. Shiphrah is not too bad, but Puah? Okay, but this is really cool, and I'm not going to write it down because I don't want to take a lot of time on this. Puah, how many of you all looked these names up and gave a definition? This is so cool. Think of where we're at in the storyline. What's happening is Israel is being, the baby boys are being persecuted specifically. It seems like a demonic force behind this attack, that he wants to destroy the bloodline that God has in store for Israel to bring about the Savior. Okay, so Puah, number 6326. If you could look this up for yourself and get the full thing. But the root to that word Puah actually means glitter or splendid, okay? But that's not the end of it. I kept moving. I went into my dictionary of biblical languages, and where it said here, it says to be abundant. The idea of glitter and splendor. See, it expands. So there comes the next part to the definition here. To be abundant. Formerly, the word means overflow. To be in a state of bountiful excess, as a figurative extension of the overflow. What happened to Israel while they were there? They were increasing and growing mightily. I just thought that was interesting that Puah would have a name that meant increase and bounty. I just thought that was cool. How interesting how God would pick a name of a midwife helping deliver these babies that spoke of this explosive bounty. So that was Puah. Don't you just love those little gems? This one's even better. Shiphrah. It's number 9188. Okay, so here we go again. Starts with the word canopy, pavilion, or state tent. It goes on to say, and now we're in the Dictionary of Biblical Languages, an area for protection from the element. It's a tent, right? A pavilion, a covering. Possibly with full or partial tent wall, and it gave some references you could go look at. And then it goes on to say, in context, this is a royal canopy where a throne of a king resides. Okay, Shiphrah, who is midwife to a nation who is going to bring who into the world? The seed. And who is the seed? The royal line of David, who is going to be king upon the throne. Think of this. And she is this tent that's a covering for that king. And how is she being a cover for that king? She's protecting them from the death that Pharaoh had ordered. Wow! I mean, that blew my mind. I went, oh, I'm so excited. Your word's so good, God. This is so cool. Okay, so I put as a reference to that, they feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them. They did not kill that baby boy. She became this tent, this covering, this pavilion for royalty in her work. Bounty and protection in the two names of these girls. Isn't that amazing? Okay, now in 20 to 22. This is really great. Because these midwives were faithful to God and feared him rather than the king, and we could go into a lot of discussion on that as well in your thinking, but because they did not obey the king, what did we see in those last verses? What did God do?
He established households for them.
Yeah. For the midwives, and then because as they were, this is what God did for them. This is God. Now, in contrast, we also see what does Pharaoh then go do?
Now we're just gonna go find boys and throw them in.
Yeah.
You know? We're not waiting for them to be born.
Yes.
If they see one, go.
Did anybody look at the idea of them throwing the baby boys into the Nile River and what that might have to do with the worship system of Egypt? at that time. I thought it might have to do something with it. Maybe it was. What we see happening here is Pharaoh's not getting his way. The midwives are not cooperating. He doesn't seem to discipline them in any way for this.
I can't believe he didn't kill him.
Huh?
I can't believe he didn't kill him.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Again, another sign of God's sovereignty. Because those women honored him, he protected them. And then not only did he do that, but he multiplied their own personal families so that they had established households. And then we see that Pharaoh then commands that all Egypt, did you know how it said all of Egypt? He commands everyone in the land now to help him out, to get rid of these baby boys. And it just shows you the extent of Satan behind this, of him wanting to destroy the male bloodline of the Egyptians, or I mean of the Israelites. But he engages all of Egypt and says, throw these baby boys into the river. My gut feeling on this was it has to be that would, for them, be something they would want to do, or otherwise they'd be horrified, right? Maybe it had something to do with their worship of the Nile. I did go in and do some research. I could not find anything. They had one mention of a ritual, but they considered it to be not a truthful thing, although I think they probably are wrong, about giving girl baby boys into the Nile. It had to do with fertility. So you guys can do some more research on that, but here's what I know. All of Egypt apparently, was going to get on board with this. And that's why, but for 40 years this is going to continue because, Moses is going to leave eventually and be gone.
And I'd heard that, some teaching that the Pharaoh was like God embodied to the Egyptians.
Yes.
So he was worshipped as a god.
Right. And
He
so,
says goes. I mean, like, yeah.
right. So the fact that,
Authority over them.
yeah,
They would have done that justifying it, God and
that's what,
certified told us.
exactly. So a double-edged sword, that's a good point. On the one hand, their God Pharaoh said, do this. Yes, sir. On the other hand, their God, the Nile, wants some kind of offering. We know sacrifices and offerings, especially when you get into Baal worship and Molech, how they would sacrifice babies and so forth. I just feel like there has to be something there, but what we don't have is historical record. But we know it happened. We know from what we're reading right here that he ordered Egypt to do this, to get on board with him, and for all of them to engage in helping to destroy the boy babies of Israel. There had to be some other motivation. There had to be some motivation on the part of the people for them to say, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. Well, they don't want to offer their own children as worship, right? So certainly take an Israelite baby boy and throw it into the river. Interesting that it was throw it into the river also. So there's all kinds of things that you could explore on that. The research that I didn't spend tons and tons of time, but I probably spent 45 minutes or an hour maybe on it, just article after article reading, but there was nothing conclusive. And a lot of people that you read, especially if it's not a biblical perspective mind that's writing the articles, they just totally dismiss it. There's no record of it. It didn't happen. The Bible says this, but they're just totally doubters. But I just found it interesting that there might have been going on. This was, to me, might have had a spiritual thing behind it, that it was a sacrifice, probably to, yes, obedience to Pharaoh, but also be a sacrifice into the Nile, right? And the crocodiles. There was the crocodile worship too, right? And that would be feeding the crocodiles. Okay, so you got like 3 things going on now. Ooh, I know, it's really horrible to think of. Okay, Pharaoh commanded all Israel, or all Egypt rather, to kill those baby boys, to throw them into the Nile. And I kind of added that on. It might be a sub-point, doesn't have to be a part of your title necessarily, but it's like, how did he want them killed, thrown into the Nile? I think that to me is significant in that it had to be something that they would have thought was a good thing, probably in their worship, their active worship to the Nile maybe.
He specified it.
Huh?
He specified
Yes, he did. He specified it. So I just feel like there's something more there, but we don't have information. That's where we have to just kind of let it go. Okay, how much time have I got now?
Like 45 minutes.
Oh, good. Okay. Now we're on to Exodus 2. Are there any other inputs that you want to add to this? What did you guys do for your extra research on this? Anything that you want to share before we move into chapter 2? Okay, listen very carefully. This is going to be the pattern. So I really would appreciate if you do some research. Do some extra work for yourself because you're going to learn to love your inductive process so much more. Once you do all the technical things of finding keywords and doing the outlining and all, then start meditating on it and saying, what in here has struck a point of interest for me to study a little bit more? Because what you see, even for me, with the names of these two girls, what an insight that was, right? What a treasure. Wouldn't you love it if you're sitting alone at home in front of your own computer with your own books open and God gave that to you? It's your own connection with the God who created and who wrote this word for us, and for him to give you insight if you're willing to dig for it. So I want you to enjoy that blessing that I get every week when I do these great little rabbit trails that I run off on, and I think, oh God, that was so good. I'm not brilliant, you guys. It's not like I know these things ahead of time. I just go and do the little bit of extra digging where I say, Lord, I want to see why. Otherwise this is just a very flat, dry historical record. He did this, he did this, he did that. What does that do for me? What does that do for you? Anything? Okay, you checked your box, you wrote your outline. But you guys have all been doing this with me long enough now that you know what the pattern is and you know what's expected technically. Now you need to step into the next level and say, God, really enrich my time in the Word with you. I want to be connected to what you were thinking. Why is Pua and Shipla mentioned in here by name? They could have just been the midwives. But their exact names were given. And when you go and do that research on their exact names, you find out the riches of why he chose those two names and gave them to us. That's encouragement. Okay, enough of that. Right. Let's go on to the next chapter. Same thing. What did you do when you looked at your big picture and you looked for your keywords and your geographical locations? Mm-hmm. So the Nile comes up again.
And then Midian.
Midian comes up as a brand new thing. That one was really cool. Did anybody look at Midian?
It looks like Abraham's second wife, Keturah,
Yes. Very good.
was
Married.
Midian.
Yeah, she gave birth to a son named Midian, and he then became this nation. Again, it's a part of this this bigger picture back of the Abrahamic covenant. I'm going to make of you many nations, right? To the wife Sarah specifically, he said that. But he said of Abraham, all the nations of the earth will be blessed in you or through you because of the seed specifically. But to Keturah, he said, I'm going to make many nations of you and kings will come from you. Media was one of those. Later we see Medo-Persian. I'm wondering if this is the Median. I don't know. I didn't look at it, so I don't know. But it just hit me. I'm thinking, maybe this is the Medo-Persian, one of the empires that was in the days of Daniel that had to do with, anyway, I don't know. Persia and Media shared through a marriage, and then they co-regent that part of history for us. But I just did a map on it. So Media was right down here. Here's Egypt up here. And at this point in the story, how does Media come into it? How does it relate to our storyline? Moses flees down there, right? So he goes from Egypt through the peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula, which we know is where he's going to go in the wilderness. And he ends up over here across the Gulf of Arabia in Media. Okay? So that just shows you geographically how far he ran. He got out of Egypt and went to a new location so that the king could not get to him.
That's where the household where he goes, the father gives him Zipporah, which is Zipporah is his oldest daughter.
Yes,
She's Midian.
yes, and she's a Midianite, right? Okay, and so she also comes from the bloodline. Hold on, let me get my note out again. I just closed it up. This is the hard part about having so much homework. It's hard to find all my pages. Okay, Keturah. So Abraham's handmaiden, it would be Keturah. Lovely Sarah jumping in to help God out, giving him handmaidens, right? But he had a second handmaiden named Keturah, and she had Zimran, J-O-K-S-H-A-N, Midian, that's the one we're talking about, Ishbak, and Shua. And you've never heard of them, right? Except for the Midian, right? Why is that? Because they didn't have significance in the storyline of God's redemption work. They were a nation that was developed. They came on the scene, but then we don't hear anything more biblically about them after this. But that's interesting, lineage from Abraham, okay?
This is not a key word, but I just thought it was interesting, there's so many women here, the midwives in chapter 1, midwife, mother, sister, and Pharaoh's daughter, all saved, and they're all women.
Yeah. I just, there's so many points in here. Okay, so key words, we have Egypt and Midian, and which one did you just say? Just a midwife again, was it by name?
I think she was just saying women in general.
Just
And in
women,
general.
just women, the midwives, the daughters.
That's how
Seems like they have a significant role in all that
Yes.
God is doing.
Yes.
You know, that's a good
Makes you
point.
Sister
realize-
Miriam, so
And you realize why he helped the women with their water, because he was taught by women.
Yes,
True.
right.
And I also thought, because he was saved out of water, I don't know.
I know, see?
He was
I
saved
went
out
there
of
too.
water, or
And then he
Sarah
saved them.
taught him.
Yes, you're right. I connected all that in my thinking too, and I thought, I don't have time to think, and my head's hurting. But it's really interesting, right? You know, a pastor could take that concept, though, and develop that into a really cool sermon and just talk about, because then later they go through the water in their escape. I mean, there's all this water everywhere. It's so cool. Okay, key words. Moses. One of the brothers, the bloodlines comes up. The name of what? Which name comes up? What tribe is Moses from? Levi. So you want to put the Levites in there, that he's a Levite or a Levi. What else? We see a wicker basket. And boy, is that cool. Think about what might be the parallel in that. Wicker basket on the river. The ark? How about the ark? Because what happened to Moses being put in the wicker basket on the water? He was saved in the end. He got saved through it. All the other baby boys were destroyed, but he was saved, right? Well, not all of them, obviously. But anyway, a lot of them. But there's that. So there's the ark and there's the water again. Okay.
I thought too, the sister, going back to what you said.
Yeah.
Miriam, she plays a big part later.
Yes, she will. So her name coming up is not insignificant at all. Yes. So, okay. Who else is a significant part of the storyline?
And then Pharaoh's daughter.
Pharaoh's daughter. And it doesn't give us a name here, but Pharaoh's daughter. There's also later a man that gets killed, and he's only identified as what? Egyptian. So you can just put Egyptian or Egyptian man, maybe. And Zipporah later, because when he flees. In 23 and 24, we see a couple of major words.
back to the people as a whole.
Yeah.
From Moses, one man, into back to the sons of Israel. God's like, oh, now's the time.
And that word bondage comes up again. So bondage has been something that seems to be coming through again, at least in the second chapter. And it seems like that's a key word. And we do know it's going to be key, because what is the bigger doctrinal theme that we're looking at with regards to the Exodus story on the whole. Yeah. Yes, as redemption out of bondage, and spiritually out of bondage to sin, which is what Romans covers, right? All right. No longer a slave to sin, but a slave to God. Okay, so bondage is a key word, but then there's a second one in 24. Covenant. Anytime you see the word covenant in Scripture, always mark it as a key word, because it's such a sacred, holy article of God's work of salvation. And it is an affirmation truly of the absolute firmness and surety of God's word. Hebrews does a beautiful job of explaining the surety of what a covenant does for you. A vow is given, and then a covenant is cut, and the two together give you an absolute assurance that what God has said is going to happen, will happen. So covenant, when it shows up, you always make sure that you notice it. And it says, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So now we have the lineage of the three major patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. So you might have wanted to look at the word saw and the word notice, taking notice.
So took notice is be aware, discovered, well known, understood, God understood, comprehended, acknowledged.
Very good.
I thought that was so
I always thought it was interesting when we did Revelation how the Ark of the Covenant sits in the temple of God in the heavenly realm, in that storyline, in that unfolding vision that was given to him. And it says that the temple was filled with smoke and that no one was allowed to enter until it was finished at that certain point in the Revelation story. But that Ark of the Covenant sat there before his face. And this makes me think of that it's a covenant that's put before his face, not for his benefit. Do you think God would forget? Never. But he's letting us know. He saw and he noticed. He's paying attention, and that's
Well,
gives
what
a,
I had here, just kind of characteristics of God that, this is my favorite verses, 24 and 25. He heard, he remembered, he saw, and he took notice. Those
Yeah.
are all what God
action words,
does.
yes. And they're all verbs on our behalf. Yes.
They were groaning and sighing, expressing grief and pain, and that cried out was appeal for help, wailing, weeping.
How often do we do that in our relationship with God?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad to say, but in your journey as a human being on planet Earth, we've all been there. Days and moments, and sometimes periods of time, where we groan, we weep, we wail, we cry out to God, and the pain is so deep and so painful, even that you almost can't even cry out in a way. It's kind of like that. You don't even know how to comprehend or what to speak. But here it says that God saw and he took notice. He remembers his covenant. And if you're in covenant with him, he's always seeing and he's always paying attention. It may not feel like it, but he is. And what assurance that is for us. Okay, so on the whole, Exodus 2, though, although it finalizes with a really big bang there about the covenant and what we see about who our God is. On the whole, Exodus 2 introduces to us a major character. Who is that? Moses by name, right? So we know that this part here is about Moses. And what do we see about Moses here?
He's putting them out. Well, basically, you just get his birth to his, he's raised Egyptian and he's out of Egypt.
Yeah, so
It's just like,
isn't that
left Egypt
interesting?
and then-
So in this storyline, we see Moses is born, and the first part of the story shows how he is kept alive by the ark. And then secondarily, he's kept alive by escape. So in both scenarios, what happens with Moses? He's kept alive. In spite of the fact that the danger is that he should have died in both scenarios, as an infant and as an adult man. So Moses is born and kept alive.
I think I counted, but I can't think of the fourth one now, that he was tried to be killed 4 times and saved.
Oh, through the course of his whole life?
No, infanticide, and then thrown into the river, and then Pharaoh's daughter saved him, and then Pharaoh
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
Probably
yeah.
Joseph's on.
But yes, and in the paragraphs of the storyline, it's as an infant he was saved, and then as an adult he was saved. So yes, so either way this works. He's kept alive, right? And the point is that he shouldn't have been, right?
I found it interesting too that he ended up exactly where Pharaoh wanted him, in the Nile.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very good, very good.
He didn't stay there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in 1-4, paragraph title. What we see again, the statement that he is born. But what about his birth is of a significant point in this first 4 verses?
He got to be with his mom for the first 3 months. She hid him first.
That he's kept secretly, yeah. So he was born and kept and secretly kept alive, right? I had to add that word in because there's no statement of that in there except that he was hidden is the word. Secretly kept alive. Okay. All right. Any other points in that particular part? We looked at the basket. But, I mean, we've kind of talked about the picture of that. Remember, what God does do when he is unfolding storylines throughout all of Scripture is he introduces a subject matter, and then it tends to, if it's a significance to the redemption story or salvation on the whole, it'll come up again. So we talked about Satan in the garden and how later we now see him as Pharaoh, right? Well, the first time we see a basket that saves people through water is Noah. So it's introduced with Noah, and now we see it again here. So I just bring that up to show you again how God repeats. He'll introduce something, first use of a word or first demonstration of a word as its most commonly understood meaning, and it gives its heaviest weight for when you are looking for understandings. So when it comes up again here, we see a basket and water, and a boy is saved. His life is saved by being in the ark on the water. Then your mind can go back, and I believe accurately that there's an accurate connection back to that God introduced it once, and now he's showing it again. Okay. All right, 5-10.
Thrown out by Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? That the very household that wants to destroy the boy babies now becomes the place of refuge, right? That's amazing. So Moses is taken as a son by Pharaoh's daughter. Nah, don't you hear God? Nanny, nanny, boo, boo. It's like in your eye. I love it. That very house that ordered his death becomes his safe haven. For how long? 40 years he's there until this next event will occur.
And I thought the other thing that's so good, in Acts 7, it talks about how his mother nurtured him and Pharaoh's daughter nurtured him. So
Yeah.
God had him this life.
You're on the women thing today, aren't you? I like the women thing.
There's still a lot of saving in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
It's like there's a lot of women that play really pivotal roles.
Yes, yes, yes. And this is why I feel like, we had such a long, dark period in our history of humanity where we really suppressed women. And it caused a lot of bitterness between husbands and wives and women on the whole about society. And, wow, what a perversion men made of, this gender thing where, Christ never intended it. He elevated when he came on the scene. He elevated women back. And so even to this day, we see so much of that oppression. But we don't want to go too far either. We want to understand God gave us designed roles, and the roles have a picture. Don't destroy God's pictures, right? Don't assume or assert to a position that's relegated for a man either. So it has to be in full balance. You have to bow your knee to God in even that, okay? But good insights, okay? 11 to 15. This is phase 2. So what we've got is Moses and in a basket, and so here he's here. If you wanted to give a segment division, he's a baby here, right? When we get to here, he is a grown man. So we've had a bunch of time pass, right, between this time when he was a baby and now that he's a grown man. Just as a time reference, you might put a clock on those two segments there to show you this difference, what's going on here. And when we get into Acts, it's going to give us, we can actually do that right now. When you go into Acts and you looked at chapter 7, did you not pick up on the two age factors that are given to you? What did you see happened his first 40 years? Where was he for 40 years? As at the palace, right? He's literally being raised by the palace, and that's in 7:23, right? Then what happens in verse 30?
40 years pass.
Yep.
At Mount Sinai.
Yeah, and he's in Midian. 7:30 verse, right? And then there's going to be another 40 years that's going to come out. It's not given to us in our reference. That reference there that you saw, the second one, was of him being in Midian. But the next one is going to be, you're going to see it later if you do more study, Deuteronomy and Numbers and Joshua. All of them tell you how long he was in the wilderness wandering with the children because of their disobedience. How long do we all know that was? 40 years. So 40 years in wilderness. And so I'm just going to put on here Deuteronomy. I'll put these up here. 8, 2 to 4. I looked these all up. Numbers 14. 33 to 34. And then again in Joshua in chapter 5, verse 6. So there's 3 verses. That was not in your homework. I just added that in because what I think it does, though, is it gives us a nice, very, very well-balanced this part of his life, this part of his life, and this part of his life. Isn't that cool? And it also helps us with perspective on what we're looking at here, because now you know that your first 2 paragraphs cover 40 years. Now we're looking at him as a grown man, and we're going to see the next 40 years here. All right? So what happens in verse 11 to 15? He becomes a full-grown man, and now what?
He kills an Egyptian and he's wanted for murder.
Yeah. What motivated him to do that?
I think he must have sensed that he was a leader.
Well, and I read a book about Moses' mother and his father, and they throughout he was with them for 3.5 years or so, and they just kept going over scripture, telling this is who this was, and he did this, and because God kept telling him he will remember.
Right. Isn't that
He will
interesting?
remember.
That's interesting. And it does make you wonder. You could remember in the movie of Moses, the old one, you know, he had a Hebrew blanket, and they brought the Hebrew blanket out at a certain point. He was a full-grown man, brought it and showed it to him, and he's like, oh, epiphany, you know. But it didn't quite happen that way. But somewhere along the line, and it does not tell us in the text, but does the text flow of thought indicate to you he did know? Yeah. So,
It says right there, one of his brethren. So he knew.
yes, yes. Where am I at? I got 11. Oh, there it is, 11. Turn the page, Katie. Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up that he went out to his brethren. So now he apparently knows this. So although the information is not given to us, But did you not have a million questions? Well, what do you mean his brethren? How do you know those were his brethren? Does this storyline tell you that? No. But possibly cross-references will help fill in the gaps, particularly maybe when you get into the New Testament commentary on it that might give a little bit more insights as to what he did know. But it doesn't tell us how he came to know or that storyline. That's where the movies get to take liberties and give you what they think might have happened.
Michael and I were talking about this, but there's no way that all of his Egyptian friends and his, Pharaoh's sons, that they didn't know he was Hebrew.
Yeah.
Because he was circumcised.
Yes.
They were not.
Yeah.
So Michael's like, it's probably just like, I'm just going to let my daughter be happy. She took this baby because she didn't have any of her own, and that's fine because he'll just be Egyptian.
Right.
Like
Evidently back then, they would take Jewish babies.
Yeah. Well, and that's been true. We see this in the storyline with Abraham, how he took a concubine and had a child with her as a surrogate. So because why Sarah wasn't getting pregnant. So surrogacy was also a part of their culture. So yeah, these things are not new. We're not we think we're all new, but no, we're not new. We're just same old man.
Passage 7, it says, when he was approaching the age of 40, it entered his mind to visit his countrymen, the sons of Israel.
Okay, so there you go. So again, New Testament commentary says it entered his mind to go visit them. So he apparently knew, but he had been what's the right word? Isolated from them for a period of time. But now he thought, I'm going to go check out these people. He goes to look. That tells you a couple of things. What do you think emotionally was going on with him then? This is a little bit like a child who's been adopted, right? An adopted child. Who am I? Where did I come from? Who are my people? Who's my mom and dad? Are they still alive? Why did they reject me? All these questions. So, although he may have known that storyline. But, yeah.
Well, and Pharaoh's daughter knew it was a Hebrew child.
Of course, because he was circumcised. She may have talked with him about it. See, there's that aspect too. It could be that I felt like the gods gave you to me because the Nile brought you to me. So and is that not how adoptive parents even speak of their children? I did not give birth to you, but I birthed you in my heart, right? And you came to me as a child that I love, as though you were my own, and I raised you and loved you in all the same ways. So yeah, so there's that backdrop. So I'm saying a lot of this morning to say to you, there's always a lot of pieces in the historical records like this that are left out that we're curious about, but have nothing to do with the unfolding plan of redemption that God is showing. He is using the books of the law to teach Israel, man broke relationship with me, this is how I am going to fix it. And first thing I have to teach you is who am I and who are you, and how is our relationship supposed to work with one another. So he first starts out in Genesis, you're a sinner. Now where we are in Exodus, this is what you need. You need redemption, you need a Savior, and I am the one who will do that. I am your Savior. So he's going to show redemption in this piece of the segment of unfolding story. So 11 to 15 then, what happens in that part? What does Moses do? Well, he does, but what does he do in order that he has to leave? Moses kills an Egyptian, and then he flees or escapes to Midian. Now, isn't it interesting to you in your thinking about this? We're seeing again a man that God is going to use to bring redemption, but he uses, in this case, this man, very flawed. He has committed an act of murder. And yet, God does not seem to address that in the story.
Except that he takes him to the desert for 40 years.
Well, he does. There's a discipline.
That's a discipline.
Well, the two Hebrew brothers called.
It's a discipline and a protection.
Well,
I mean, it's both.
It's sanctification.
Yes, yes. And it's going to talk about that.
The two Hebrew boys called him into account.
Yes, they did. They saw it. Okay, so boy, there's a lot of stuff we could talk on this, and we don't have time, but think about secret sins. Are they really secret? What does God say about the bird of the air will carry your words? So be careful what you say, right? Yeah. So here we have a bird of the wind kind of a moment with Moses where someone actually saw. He said he looked this way and he looked that. So he was looking. He knew what he did was wrong. He was looking to see if anybody saw before he did it. And so this is premeditated. He thought about it. He looked around. Nobody's there. Kill, right? So, wow, there's a whole bunch in this that you could think about. And yet, who is this man that God is going to use, this murderer, to bring his people out of their bondage to what? Sin. What did Paul say about himself in sin? A sinner of whom I am the chief of it. Right? So, again, a parallel with the Old Testament prophets and the New Testament. So, Paul and Moses, in this case, both murderers of God's people, were redeemed themselves by God. He will go through a time of refinement by God is in those 40 years in the wilderness, where God, and the scriptures talk about that. What God did during that time was to refine him, to teach him discipline, to teach him to bow his knees, to learn, sin is not okay, right? But it's interesting to me that God doesn't specifically address the fact that he murdered, and it's never brought up again.
But he humbles him.
He will humble him, of course.
And he had all
Of course.
this authority.
But why do you remember the story of Cain? And yet he put a mark on Cain and said, no one touch him. And then he doesn't explain it. David sent Uriah out to die, although he paid a heavy price in it, and yet what does David become? The bloodline of the King of Kings. What are we learning in all of these pictures that we're seeing here as we're talking about what God does with sinful man and what he does on behalf of sinful man?
And the one he chooses.
The ones that he chooses are not perfect people. He says he takes the weak things in order to shame the wise.
And he did it constantly.
It does. So what does that say to you personally?
He can use us.
He can use us. We're broken. We're very flawed. And we, of all person, well, unless you're a narcissist, but you should reflect on this, right? Unless you just don't see that in yourself. But you and I can reflect on, really, I know my weaknesses, and I know how you can get my goat, right? My family knows how to get my goat. And yet God says, I recognize that's who you are, but this is what I want you to be. And I love you in spite of yourself. As a matter of fact, from before the foundation of the world, God knew that we would be sinners. And yet he sends his son to die for us. He provides a way. So this is what we're seeing with Moses. Moses commits murder right at the get-go. And he did so saying, he assumed that they would know that God was sending him to be their redeemer. So there's another piece of this. Apparently, he seems to know something about the promise of 400 years that there would be a redeemer come to take them out, and that maybe he was it. Do you think? Seems like it's suggested in the way this unfolds. So that also tells you there's a lot more knowledge in his head about the Hebrew people and the writings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I would think within the Egyptian world at that time, they knew who these Hebrew people were. Even though it had been 400 years, they had to have known enough of the storyline. How did they get here? Well, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Jacob came down and he brought Joseph, and Joseph saved our nation from famine. And I mean, apparently there's more knowledge than is ever recorded for us. And yet we can kind of make connections, right? We can make logical conclusions. We may not be exactly on target on all of them, but we're going to have a pretty good idea. What we know is Moses knew more than what is told to us. He saw a connection with the Israelite people. They were his people. He called them his brethren. So what you, go ahead. 10 minutes? No. Okay, 10 to, all right.
Sorry.
Okay, so here what we see here is God provides protection and blessing. And why do I say that? Because of the next part, 16 to 22. What happened while he runs from having committed this horrible crime? What happens to Moses next in our unfolding story?
He gets married.
Moses gets married. He married.
And he has a kid.
Yes, and interesting. What kind of a kid?
Male.
A boy baby. Oh my goodness. Again, God is sticking his finger right in the eye of Satan and saying, so, you wanted to kill the boy baby? Now this boy baby's going to have a baby. And by the way, this boy baby you wanted to kill, he's going to come back and get you. I just love it. Married and then had a baby. I would put had a son because I think that's of significance. And where was he? In Midian. So later you're going to find that that's 40 years in Midian. Now 40 years. Oh, no, 40 years. Sorry. I already wrote it up here. 40 years as a grown man before he goes into the wilderness. We don't get the wilderness part of this at all in our unfolding story. So that last 40 years will come when you go into Numbers and Deuteronomy. That's when you would get the rest of that. Okay? So he marries Zipporah, and he has a son named Gershom. Okay? All right, so now the only other thing we have to cover, and we've only got about 10 minutes, but we want to talk about these cross-references about what the commentaries show us about Moses that I think is very insightful. Let's talk about Moses' mom and dad in particular, Moses' parents.
What about verses 23 to 25?
Oops. Okay. Darn it, I'm not going to have as much time as I thought. Okay, but this was quick though, so it's really good. So 23 to 25, this is the part where we talked already in length about this covenant, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and what that covenant was. It was that promised seed from the Genesis record, and that seed was Christ, according to Galatians, our New Testament commentary on that verse. You didn't do that homework in this study, but it's stuff that we've covered before. So what's going on in 23 to 25 that closes this part of the storyline?
Well, the Pharaoh that wanted Moses dead dies. So he could go back.
Okay, so he does.
So God remembers them now that, I mean, because it has that, you know, Pharaoh's
Okay, so
dead.
Pharaoh, I didn't even put that on my title, but you know, that might be,
Because the title of your thing is Moses is born and kept alive.
and kept alive.
Right now, he's supposed to be like,
Yeah, so Pharaoh. Pharaoh dies,
'cause I always
or
think-
that Pharaoh dies specifically.
I've always
Pharaoh
connected
dies.
that now that Pharaoh is dead, Moses can return.
Yeah, so Pharaoh dies. What about Israel?
They're crying out.
Cries out. And that's a very interesting, it doesn't say they cry out to God. It says that they just cry out because they don't seem to be connected to God at all yet. That cries out and because of bondage. So what we learned then is the next Pharaoh, that Pharaoh dies, we get a new Pharaoh. But what's still going on? The bondage and the harsh treatment. So even though they get but the good part of how Moses is kept alive is that Pharaoh who wanted Moses dead is now himself dead. So that's kind of done and put behind. Now we get a new Pharaoh on the scene. But Israel is crying out because of bondage. And then what we see is God remembers covenant.
Really long time.
Well, I don't know that can be a sub-point. I think the storyline is that Israel is crying out because of their bondage. That's the main emphasis in that particular part. But yes, the one dies second. Okay, now let's do Moses. Everyone good? This is going to be fun. I think this journey is just seeing the unfolding story. One of the things about all of us as Christians and being in the church for quite a few years for most of us is we've heard about these stories, but have we ever really studied these? And no, it is so fun to go back and really get the detail, the nitty-gritties to it. Okay, first of all, tell me what you learned about Moses' parents. Uh-huh.
They talked to Moses constantly. Of course, they didn't call him Moses.
Now, are you getting this from your text? Can you give me scripture verses?
No.
Oh,
It's in the book.
no, I want you to go to your cross references, Hebrews 11.
They're like, if it was a Levite line, the Levite line.
Okay. Of the line of Levi. Okay, and do you have a verse for that? We're in Hebrews 11 right now.
Oh, Hebrews 11, okay. Exodus 2:1.
Yeah,
It's not in Hebrews.
it's not in Hebrews. But I can still put this on here. Of
Somewhere I
the
read
line
that his mother
of
was a
Levi.
Levite line.
And that's in Exodus. What verse was that?
Exodus 2:1.
2:1? Okay, thank you. Chapter 2, verse 1. So we'll just start that out as a piece of information that both parents are Levites. Okay, now going into Hebrews 11, our cross-reference, which is New Testament commentary. Tell me what you learned in Hebrews 11 about his parents.
They hid him for 3 months because he was beautiful.
Yes, isn't that interesting? So now your question is, what does that mean they thought he was beautiful?
The other baby in there.
No, yeah, right. But
One thing that I read, it didn't use beautiful, they used, like extraordinary or non-ordinary.
okay, right, okay. What do you think happened? Think about this scenario. All the baby boys are to be killed by order of Pharaoh, right? The midwives are trying to expedite this. They know this, apparently, because they hide him, right? So they know that Pharaoh's out to kill their baby boy. They look at this baby boy and go, there's something special. What do you think that's about? Where did that thought come from?
Kind of an anointing.
Seems like there's a work of the Holy Spirit. God is speaking to their heart and mind in some way where I know he's supposed to be dead, and if they find him, he's going to be dead. But there's something about him. I've got to hide him. You know, I don't know what God is doing here, but first of all, what is it in contrast to what's going on in our culture today with babies? Yeah, they're wanting to abort babies. They have no value whatsoever. So, I mean, there's a part of that. They see him as valuable, as something to be protected and preserved. It just shows you the heart of the idea that God created man in his own image and we're not to destroy the image of God. That's going to come up later in the storyline where we see the Ten Commandments come on. But it seems like Moses' parents had an intuitive understanding of the value of life and that it wasn't to be destroyed. So they wanted to protect it, right? A baby created in God's image, a boy condemned to danger of death, and yet they were willing to risk their own lives to protect this baby. That's extraordinary, okay? What else? What happened when they could no longer continue to hide him? And they knew the time was coming.
In the river.
So did they just arbitrarily throw him out and hope that something good would happen? Or
Sister would be to have some of them keep vigil.
yeah, I wonder if,
That's where Pharaoh's daughter went to bathe.
yes, it was. So it seems like there's a lot of strategic thinking going on here, and possibly even for themselves, knowing the history of God and of that God had flooded the earth and man was saved by an ark. Maybe even that, who knows what they were thinking. But they strategically released him, right? Strategically did release him. And what was behind that was faith, and trust. I don't know what's going to happen. He may die in spite of all my efforts on that water. But if that's what happens, then that's God's will. Right. And so they're praying that won't be the case, but they're walking by faith, and they're actually taking a step of action. What do we do in our faith walk with God? Are there times when you and I have the same thing? I don't know if this is going to work out, but I think it might work out. Donna can certainly speak on this right now, right? I wonder if I'm supposed to go there. Is that where God wants us? Is this the right house? What do I do with my mom? What do I do with my daughter and my grandchildren? All these what ifs, and yet what you do then when you're walking by faith, and Hebrews speaks about this also, right? You put one foot first and then the next, and you wait for God to slam a door or continue to open. And that's how we walk a life of faith. So do you not see that's what was going on with this family? They definitely want to preserve that baby's life. And if they have anything to do with it, his life will live. He will continue to live on. But they know they're not really in control. Pharaoh's in the picture, and they're going to have to place their little baby into the hand of God. Every parent needs to know that. I just had a whole week of praying for a little baby who has severe asthma, was in ICU and all this. It was just horrible for the family. But in the end, he's now home and he's well. But isn't that true with all of us? We don't know if God is granting us our next day or the next day for our child. Donna actually also had this experience with a baby that was born in her family that was very severely, what do you call it? He was not formed. She was not formed correctly, yes. So she only lived a short amount of time, right? Oh, she didn't live at all. I thought you all had her for. Okay, never took a breath. That's sad. But what a picture of faith. Her mom carried that baby full term and waited to see what God would do.
And she was alive the entire time until
Until she went through the birth canal, right. So, but you don't know. What if miraculously God had healed the baby in the womb? By faith, her faith would have been proven to be true. I mean, in that regard. But regardless, you're trusting God, right? Okay, so it's cool strategy. So we see they're people of faith.
We're out of time.
Oh dear. People of faith, and they took action by faith.
phrase, seeing him who is unseen in that Hebrew.
Yeah. They engaged in spiritual warfare by faith and trusted God for whatever, that's a hard one, the outcome will be. And wow, did it have a great outcome. Now, let's move to the next one. And that is Moses himself. And I'm just going to read these to you in order to close this out. But I know that you all probably saw these as well. All that Moses knew about the God of the Israelites, this early record is not clear on. But there are two things that we have to go by as inductive students. Number one, we look at his actions. The actions that he took and what is stated to us in there. So we glean as much as we can from what we see him do and believe that therefore if he did something, you're not going to act on something if you either don't know it or you don't believe it, right? So he took actions based on some kind of information. So his actions speak to us. And then secondarily, we look at the New Testament commentaries to see what they tell us. So the things that's told to us in Hebrews, in the commentary, is he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose ill treatment with God's people rather than the passing pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. What? This guy had some spiritual, intuitive sensing that was beyond the human experience at the moment, but yet you know therefore that God is, his spirit is speaking to Moses' spirit. He literally said, I'd rather take the same kind of reproaches as my Christ. That's amazing, than have the treasures of Egypt. He was looking to the eternal reward in verse 26. And in 27, he fixed his eyes on God, not fearing the king. Okay? So my day 3, I went through all of this. My reflection on what we have looked at concerning him is His knowledge that he was a Hebrew and seeing their harsh treatment eventually prompts him to take action. He intervened at a great cost, a choice and an action that resulted in a life of exile. So he actually did wrong, but with the right reasons, because we already see that. He was refusing to take the easy path rather than the hard path because of his faith. And Hebrews 11 indicates that he had, in other words, he had noble intentions. That's what I just read to you in all those verses. He did have noble intentions. However, the storyline also lets us know that he jumped way ahead of God on this. First of all, it would never be God's will that we would kill someone. I mean, that would not be a good thing. God will take now the next 40 years refining him, preparing this man to be God's spokesman and leader of his people. That's redemptive story right there within the redemptive plan on the bigger picture. A redemption of a single man, Moses, for the purpose of redeeming a people group, for the purpose of explaining to you and I what relationship with God must be about. There must be a redemption, and you have to understand who your Savior is. That it's not you, that it's God. It's a supernatural work. His 40 years of teaching in the palace of Pharaoh did not make a false God worshiper out of him. What do we learn about that thought? He spent 40 years under the household of Pharaoh being taught all the false God worships of their people, not being exposed to Christian truth. But yet, what did he not become? A false God worshiper. Does that give anybody hope? Does that speak on any level, evangelists out there? That's an amazing testimony. Moses seems to have had that inner truth written on his heart that we see explained in Romans 1, 20 to 23. Go back and read it on your own. Romans 1, 20 to 23. It's really interesting how God talks about eternity being written on the hearts of men. Even if we don't see man, even if we don't know God, even if we are not told about God, there's a sense of eternity printed on the heart of man. There's a God hole in our heart that we all have heard of sermons on that cannot be filled by anything else. Pleasures of the world, relationships with one another, our riches, our accomplishments, nothing fills that hole. We have a need for God. And it seems like Moses had that understanding. And so I feel like he was like this Romans 1, 20 to 23 guy, that he did not get turned over to the debauchery of his own mind to serve and to worship the creation rather than the creator. But rather, he had this hole in his heart and he recognized it and he sought to have that hole filled correctly. And that's the story that I pulled out of what we saw so far about Moses. All right. Good times. Any other points of interest? We got through Exodus 1 and 2. Only 5 minutes over. Not bad.
And reminder, next week is days 4 and 5.
That's right. Next week you're going to do days 4 and 5 of lesson 1. Okay? We have broken all these lessons down into two. Yeah. Martha's like, oh, good. You missed that piece of information, but it's important because otherwise we wouldn't get through these lessons. It's just too much to discuss. All right. Thank you, guys. See you all next week.